Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man! Welcome, whether you're watching or listening to us on the radio, of course to our audience here and to our panel. And tonight our panel is made up of the former leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Annabel Goldie, the Scottish Government's Cabinet Secretary for Infrastructure, responsible for all kinds of things, including the Forth Road Bridge, Keith Brown of the SNP, a Labour's newly elected leader in Scotland, Kezia Dugdale, the editor of Money Week magazine, Merryn, Somerset, Webb, and the English musician who campaigned for Scottish independence, one of many campaigns he's put his weight behind, Billy Bragg. And as always, I should just say, if you want to get into this debate, you can, of course, do it either by texting or by tweeting our hashtag BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. You can text us. 83981 is the number, and you push the red button and you can see what others are saying. Right, let's go straight to our first question tonight, which comes from Jennifer Mee, please. Jennifer Mee.
I'd like to ask the panel, is the House of Lords more in tune with the British public than our elected representatives in Westminster?
Is the House of Lords more in tune? This is, of course, over the tax credit issue when the House of Lords voted down the House of Commons, and among those voting was the newly ennobled Annabel Goldie, former leader of the Tories. Is the House of Lords more in tune with public opinion?
Well, I think the important issue to remember, Jennifer, is that the House of Commons is the elected Parliament. That's the Parliament voters elect MPs to. The House of Lords is unelected. Now, some might want to get rid of the House of Lords. I think it actually does a good job of reviewing legislation. I think it is needed as a secondary chamber at Westminster. But I voted with the government on Monday night because I thought it was wrong that an unelected House of Lords should be overthrowing the duly processed decisions of an elected House of Commons. So I think there is a point of principle in there. Now, that's not to say that the House of Lords proved to be a very both useful and a very well-informed forum for addressing an issue which clearly has generated a great deal of interest, a great deal of passion and a great deal of concern, which is the matter of reforming tax credits.
But hang on a second, you're saying they shouldn't have done this, and now you're beginning to say that they actually are in tune with public opinion on the issue, which is what the questioner was asking.
Well, what I'm saying is that there's a conflict between, I think, assuming that an unelected body like the House of Lords should be in a position to overthrow the decisions of the elected Parliament, which is the House of Commons. And I just believe very strongly that's an issue of principle. What I am saying, David, is that I think the House of Commons, as the elected Parliament, is a correct place for decisions to be made. It doesn't mean the House of Lords doesn't have a role, and I was just explaining why I think it actually performed a useful role. But at the end of the day, and I wouldn't hide from this, I also voted with the government on Monday night because I do approve of what the Chancellor is trying to achieve in terms of turning our economy around from a high welfare, high tax and low waged economy. I want to see us give people decent wages without having to subsidise their wages with tax credits.
OK, well, that's the policy. We're talking about who has the ear of the British public, the House of Commons or the House of Lords. Let's just stick with that for a minute. I'll come back to you. Kezia.
No, they don't look like or sound like the rest of the country, but by God, I'm glad they were there this week. Now, Annabel said, you know, this was on a point of principle. I'm afraid it wasn't. Do you remember the TV debates during the general election? David Cameron went on television and told us he wouldn't cut tax credits. It wasn't in his manifesto, and now he's trying to cut £1,300 from families across the country. I think the Lords went in and voted this week to try and hold David Cameron to what he told the British public, and I'm glad that they did that. That's a really good thing that legislation's now been sent back to have another look at, because this is going to hurt working people across the whole of the country.
OK, so you do believe they're more in tune than the House of Commons?
No, I don't. I want to scrap the House of Lords. I want a revising second chamber that's elected. It's important that we have a second chamber that can go over the details of when the government gets it wrong. But it doesn't have to be full of old lords and ermine robes and cloth caps. We can do this differently, and it's high time we should.
OK, you, sir, what do you think?
For me, I mean, politically, I don't think the House of Lords should be there. I think they should be abolished. They're unelected. However, practically and personally, my mum, who was a single mother, relied on tax credits for both me and my brother. The fact that if I was brought up now, that would mean that she'd lose that money. If there was an emergency in my household, say a car breaks down, washing machine, where do you turn when you haven't got that safety net? George Osborne is saying he wants to get rid of the debt, but what's actually happened is payday loans. My mum probably have to get a payday loan. She's in debt. The country, well, that's fine for the millionaires, isn't it?
OK. Merryn.
Well, I obviously very much approve of having a second house. I think every democracy should have one, which is why I'm slightly concerned that Scotland doesn't have one, a reforming and a reviewing house. And so I think in this case, the Lords did exactly the right thing, given what they think about the tax credit debacle. However, I'm not convinced that means that they're particularly in tune with the rest of the country, either on this issue or any others. I mean, if you look at the polls on this matter, in fact, there was huge public support and remains huge public support for the support of for change to the tax credit regime. So I think maybe in this case you could say the Lords was more in tune with media opinion than population opinion.
OK. The woman here in the front, yes, in the second row. Yes, you.
I have to disagree there. Scotland does have a second tier that's called the public. So if our government doesn't do what we ask, we vote them out. But just on the point, the Lords is completely unelected. It needs to be scrapped straight away. And the money we save on that, why don't we then use that to go towards the money that's going to be missing from the tax credits? There's absolutely no need for people to go without tax credits while waiting 4 years on their wages to hit a living wage. It's disgusting.
But on the political point, the House of Commons, after all, the Tories have a majority there, and they were elected by the whole UK. Do you think it's right that the House of Lords should You don't want a House of Lords?
I don't believe in the House of Lords, and I think the House of Commons, because it's not proportional representation, it's unfair anyway. So let's change the whole thing, get proportional representation, as we do in Scotland, and when we're not happy, we change the government. Kezia would know about that.
OK. Keith Brown.
I think the first thing to say is I think that the House of Lords is a democratic abomination and we shouldn't have it. It costs an awful lot of money. If it happens to do something that we would agree with, that doesn't justify having a House of Lords, and we should get rid of it. I think there's also another side to the democratic element here as well, though. The point that was made before is David Cameron was asked by you on a programme just before the election, would he lower tax credits, and he said he wouldn't do it. And then, lo and behold, £4.5 billion of cuts come forward. And, of course, this £4.5 billion of cuts to family tax credits is going to help pay for the tax reduction for those that pay inheritance tax. So the poorest in society are going to be subsidising some of the most well-off in society. That's not democratic either. And also, we should mention the means by which it was done. There's a good Scots word called sleek it, and when George Osborne put it in a statutory instrument hoping to squeeze it past through the process, he was rumbled on this occasion. None of this justifies the House of Lords, but there is no way for justifying the cut to tax credits. And we're talking about a ladder of opportunity. The Tories are about taking away the bottom 3 rungs of that ladder for ordinary people.
I should just say, your leader here in Scotland, Ruth Davidson, said that the tax credit cuts were not acceptable. The aims sound, we can't have people suffering in this way. So you were actually voting against the wishes of the Tory leader in Scotland on this occasion, presumably.
Well, what Ruth did make clear was she supports the aim of the changes, but she felt there was a need to look at those who might be most disproportionately affected.
And did you feel that?
A view which I shared.
Then why did you vote in favour of the policies Osborne was putting through?
Because, like Ruth, I supported the principle of what we're trying to achieve, but I had a concern about the impact for certain groups of people on the lower end of the earnings scale, and I have written to the Chancellor. I wrote to the Chancellor about that.
But nevertheless, because you thought it was wrong for the House of Lords to overrule George Osborne and the government, you voted in favour of no change, because had you won the day, there would have been no change.
Well,
Osborne's only changed his view, hasn't he?
I disagree with that. The Chancellor had made clear that he was in a listening mode, and I think that was absolutely right.
But he didn't say that till afterwards.
No, he said it before. He said he was in a listening mode, and I think what's happened now is a very sensible response to this. The Chancellor will look at this, and I think it is right he does that.
Okay.
And he will try to ensure the transition is eased so that the people who feel greatest concern, the gentleman there was referring to the situation he's worried about, that an eye is kept in that and appropriate steps are taken.
And do you agree with what Keith Brown said, that Cameron, on the Question Time that we've seen over and over again, did actually say he wasn't going to do this, and then they changed their minds?
Well, what the Conservatives said in their manifesto was they laid out how they wanted to continue with the economic recovery, and that's why I want to come back to Keith. Keith is indicating we're living in some sort of economic, nightmare. We're not. We're transformed from where we were 5 years ago. We're transformed in terms of the many more thousands of people, millions of people who've got jobs in the UK.
The question was about the way in which you bring down the deficit and whether Cameron had given the promise.
Yes, and what I'm saying is that in the manifesto that the Conservatives put to the electorate in May, they said, look, we've got to keep going with the economic recovery. It's still fragile. We can't walk away from that. That means saving money in a variety of areas.
So what you say on Question Time in the run-up to an election doesn't really matter?
Well, what you say to David Dimbleby
doesn't really matter. We know that. What you say to David Dimbleby never matters. Billy Bragg, I'll come back to you.
I'm sure this panel takes a few everything matters of your programme.
Billy Bragg.
Well, I think that what's happened really is a sleight of hand by George Osborne on a number of levels. Firstly, by seeking to appropriate Labour's clothes by announcing a living wage, although really it's a minimum wage, and then finding out that he's announced living wage doesn't really cover, in any way, really, the amount that's been taken away from people by the cuts in tax credit. So that's left him rather embarrassingly exposed. And then the second sleight of hand was to use a statutory instrument to deprive the Labour Party and the SNP and other parties that are opposed to these tax cuts any time to hold the government to account over this, wing it into the House of Lords and just get it sorted out. And this is part of the reason why we need to make the second chamber elected. It's not only because it's the biggest assembly in any democracy in the world. It has 816 members, around 816 members. David Cameron has been the worst for this. He's put more new members in there than any other Prime Minister since life peerages were implemented in 1958. He's put 236 peers in there.
And now, still outvoted by the other parties.
Exactly, but now he's turning around and saying what a bad idea it is, the House of Lords. I mean, the point of the House of Lords, it's not to represent the people. It doesn't represent us in any way. But what was proven the other night is the necessity of a revising chamber.
Okay.
We do have someone, we need someone to stand as a backstop in our democracy, but they must be elected. They must be elected because, if I just finish, the reason why they need to be elected, I believe they should be indirectly elected as they are in France and in Germany, but the reason why they need to be elected is to stop governments, and Blair did this as well, using things like statutory instruments to deprive our elected representatives of the right to hold the government of the day to account. If the second chamber had teeth, there's no way the government could whiz stuff through the House of Commons. Reforming the House of Lords helps the House of Commons.
OK, let me hear from some more members of the audience. The woman up there at the back.
Yeah, if David Cameron didn't lie to everybody, then this wouldn't be an issue, would it? It tells you a whole pile of rubbish, gets elected. Now, if I go for a job and I lie and I get found out, I'd expect to be sacked. Why is he not getting sacked, quite frankly?
OK. And we'll to you on 1, 2, 3, on the gangway, fourth row up.
See, I do agree with the principle that the government shouldn't be topping up low wages, but I am quite confused as to why the cuts in tax credits are coming now and are not coming with the increase in wages.
Merryn, what's your view of that?
Well,
do you think the timing is wrong?
Yeah, timing was probably a little bit out. It should have been done at roughly the same time. But I think there's a really important point to take on here that I think has been very, very undiscussed in the whole conversation about tax credits, and it plays directly to your point about your mother, which is that we are not just paying tax credits to people in the lower quintile and lower percentages of incomes. We're paying it right up the way. We're paying it to people in the second and third quintiles. It's possible on tax credits, working tax credits and child tax credits to have an income of the equivalent of a taxed income of somewhere in the region of £50,000. So what we're doing here is we're paying vast amounts of welfare to what we would consider to be the middle classes. We're not just paying it to the lower parts of society. And that hasn't been recognised in the media debate. And it wasn't recognised, I think, in the laws either. So this reform is absolutely vital. There has got to be considerable reform to welfare. The money that we are paying to what most of us consider to be the middle classes is money that is not being spent on our NHS, is not being spent on our pension disasters, it's not being spent on our education. We have to make choices, and right now we're making the wrong ones.
But Merryn, why isn't the free market paying people a proper wage? What's the problem with the free market? It's a fundamental failure in the free market to pay people proper wages, because over the years the rights of people to organise in the workplace have been taken away from them. You know, people need more sort of cooperation in the workplace. What's the problem? What's wrong with capitalism?
There are lots of problems here. One of them, I'm afraid, is welfare. If a company knows that wages are going to be topped up by other taxpayers, by the state, they have licence to pay less. I mean, you wouldn't go and shop in Tesco's if the people behind the tills were slowly starving to death, would you? Of course you wouldn't. So then they'd have to pay higher wages. They don't have to, because we're topping it up. So this is a fundamental problem. Okay. There has also been, there has been a big shift away from Labour towards capital, but it is shifting back. Capitalism moves in big cycles, and we're seeing a proper shift back here towards Labour away from capital.
Before reforming capitalism, let's just have the man in the second row from the back there, and then we'll go on to another question. Yes, you?
I just think this whole situation is really, really ironic. The House of Lords has a member, for example, like the Chief Executive of Next, who says that a single person can live on £6.70 an hour sufficiently. If that area of government is telling you, the elected body, that your policies are too harsh, I really think the question should be how out of touch is the elected government, not how out of touch is the House of Lords.
Well, we'll have more on that again. We must go on, and I want to, just before I take another question, by the way, we're going to be in, I should say this, Tottenham in North London next Thursday. We're in Stoke-on-Trent the Thursday after that, so that's North London and then Stoke-on-Trent. There's on the screen the way to apply. I'll give the details at the end of the programme. Catherine Fenton, let's have your question. Catherine Fenton.
With Corbyn as leader, will the Labour Party be saved in Scotland?
With Jeremy Corbyn as leader, will the Labour Party be saved in Scotland? This is being watched with great interest south of the border. Keith Brown.
Well, all the evidence suggests not, if you look at the polling evidence since Jeremy Corbyn was elected. And I think there are a number of reasons why that. I think some people had a real expectation that we're going to see something quite different. And I don't think it's transpired. For example, one of the big promises was on Trident. We were going to see a real debate in the Labour Party, which never happened at their conference in England. Might happen this weekend in Scotland, we don't know, but we look like Jeremy Corbyn won't be there to see that. And you end up with a really difficult situation for the Labour Party and Jeremy Corbyn, whether it's of his making or his party's, where he says, for example, I would never press the button for nuclear weapons. And I agree with that. It's immoral. You cannot conceive of a situation where you should be pressing that button. But to then have a party which now wants to spend £167 billion on nuclear weapons that the leader says he would never use, to me is utterly immoral. And I think that's part of the problem for Jeremy Corbyn. Some of the promise which was there, and obviously many people bought into that, some of them quite literally for £3 in order to cast their votes. But I think we're now seeing either he's a prisoner of a party which doesn't want to change. We don't see much evidence of the kinder, nicer politics from others. I think Kezia today is calling all SNP members robots with microchips in their head, for example. I don't think the changes which people expected are being followed through. Who knows over time, but there's no evidence as yet. And I think a poll came out this week, for example, which showed that since being elected, he's gone dramatically down in the polls. And the real issue is, if that continues, and if there's no sign of a Labour revival across the UK, then what we're facing here in Scotland is virtually perpetual Tory government. And there's only one way we can avoid that happening in future. So I don't think Corbyn is going to oversee an increase in terms of the Labour Party in Scotland. We're not seeing that so far. And whilst the Labour Party, every opportunity in the Scottish Parliament just says SNP bad for everything that's done, again, I can't see anything positive coming out of the Labour Party. It may be that Jeremy Corbyn has very good intentions in that regard, but they're not evident so far, so I don't see a bounce.
Thank you. course, Kezia, before the election, you said about Jeremy Corbyn, you have to convince me he can be Prime Minister. Here's a guy who's broken the whip 500 times. How can he enforce discipline with that record? So you had a rather low view of him. Now he's leading the Labour Party. What's your view of him?
Lots of people have said that was a disparaging remark. Maybe I can comment on that tonight. I desperately want there to be a Labour government in this country. I want the Tories out, and I see Labour as the only party across the whole of the United Kingdom that can really stand up for working people. So when I cast my vote for who should be the Labour leader, I had to vote for somebody I thought could be Prime Minister, that could unite this country and make a fairer country for everyone. Now, what I would say is
Who did you vote for?
I voted for Yvette Cooper. Now, what I would say to you is that, and I've never said that publicly before, but you ask a straight question, you get a straight answer. It's straight, honest, talking politics, as Jeremy would have it. I've spent a lot of time with Jeremy over the past few weeks. He is a man of tremendous principle, and he feels the pain of working families across this country in his bones. And he is going to transform this country with a message about why it doesn't have to be this way. That tomorrow can be better than today. He has the vision that we need. And I'm excited about what he might set out in the weeks and months ahead. But if I can just address your question very specifically, you asked about whether the Scottish Party has a future. You know, we are in terrible trouble. I recognise that. It's why I went for the job, because I believe the values of the Labour Party are as relevant now as they have ever been. Believing in the potential of people and using the power of government to realise that potential, that's the Labour way. I want to build a fairer, more equal country, and I think that over the next few weeks and months you'll see a Labour policy platform coming forward which will inspire you once again.
OK. Met with silence here. Annabel Goldie.
I think the problem for Labour in the United Kingdom and in Scotland is people don't know what they stand for. Now, as far as I can understand, on the one hand, Jeremy Corbyn wants to espouse a type of socialism, which, you know, in terms of his right to do that is perfectly legitimate, but it's a form of socialism going back 40 years ago to the days of Harold Wilson, which proved to be completely unelectable. And if you look at what Jeremy Corbyn has been talking about, he believes in...
Harold Wilson won election after election.
No, he didn't. He eventually lost.
One in 64, one in 66.
He eventually lost, and he left...
One in 74.
Well, he left an economic...
He retired. He didn't lose any...
He left. But what Harold Wilson did was to leave an economic legacy which was the product of Labour's economic policies, which were a complete failure, which were all about how not to run an economy, how not to generate wealth, create jobs and give people opportunities. And that's why we headed into the disaster which we did in the 1970s, when the government didn't run the country, the Labour government did run the country, the International Monetary Fund ran the country.
Come back to the Labour in Scotland against
Yeah, but the other
this
difficulty for Jeremy Corbyn is, I mean, he is, I think, completely incredible on the issue of defence. Now, to me, economy and defence are two of the most important obligations for government. And I respect that Keith has a view about Trident. I disagree with him, but I respect his view. And there's a clarity about the SNP position. It doesn't want Trident. But come back to Labour. Jeremy Corbyn apparently doesn't believe in Trident. He doesn't believe in the nuclear deterrent. Apparently he's not all that keen on the military forces, full stop. He's got shadow cabinet colleagues who do believe in Trident. In Scotland, nobody knows what Labour believes. Kezia, I think, wants Trident, but her party can't make its mind up, and they're going to have a discussion about it at their conference this weekend.
Is that true? Do you want Trident?
You cannot run a party like that.
Let's take a check on that. Do you believe in Trident? Do you support Trident?
I'm a multilateralist. I think the best way to give up nuclear weapons is with other countries around the world. However, I stood on a platform to lead my party, to lead a more democratic party. So I'm giving the power to decide our party position to our membership this weekend. Now, I think that there are mixed views on this issue, regardless of your party politics, and a good thing to do is to be honest and frank about it. But here's the thing. My party isn't in trouble because people don't know where we stood on the issue of Trident. My party is in trouble, and I got this message loud and clear from the general election result, because people thought we were run from Westminster. that the Scottish Labour Party didn't put Scotland first. Now, I'm going to turn that around, and that's why I've been in the news so much this week talking about a more autonomous Scottish Labour Party, one where we determine our future here in Scotland in the interests of the people of Scotland. I think that's the right way
So
forward.
you'll have two parties, an English Labour Party and a Scottish Labour
It's not
Party.
an independent party, it's a more autonomous party. There are lots of examples of this across Europe, more federal-type solution.
And if this doesn't work at the elections in May and the Tories get more votes than you
In Scotland?
in Scotland,
I think
Would
you'll find
your-
that's very unlikely.
Well, that's...
would your
fair
position as leader be on the line?
I don't think that's really for me, but I've...
Well, it would be, because you could say, I resign.
Well, no, I'm in it for the long haul. I don't expect that the fortunes of the Labour Party in Scotland can be turned round overnight. That said, I'm going to give it a really good go.
Hold on, Billy, I'll come to you in a minute. Let's just hear from some members of our audience first. Now, who should we go to? I'll go to you there, in the spectacles, and then I'll come over here to you. Yes?
I think when considering the question, we should consider on two grounds. First of all, the crucial need for a voice in Scotland in the Westminster Parliament, and the need for a party to take into consideration Scottish issues, Scottish needs, and reiterate them in the Westminster Parliament. And another thing, when considering the second ground, when considering Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party, we should the problem, and I think it's been clearly shown in the media, of the incompetency he has of running the Labour Party, and as the panel has most kindly said, the problem he has with the shadow cabinets, with the problem he has with members of his party standing against him and publicly giving statements against things that he is saying is he's saying that the party should be focusing on.
Okay, so in effect you're saying he can't restore Labour in Scotland?
I'm saying that there is incompetency in his leadership.
Because if you can't restore Labour in Scotland, Labour's in a bad way. You say yes, over there.
I think one of the biggest problems with this entire thing is the fact that 60% of members in Labour voted for Corbyn, yet there's so many MPs within Labour who are almost not publicly yet, but are voting against him, and it just shows how divided Labour themselves are. I think the only way that they're going to be able to gain votes back if they show a bit more of togetherness, rather than having this entirely, broken apart party.
And togetherness means who wins? The party?
No, but I think
in
they
the
should be
country,
definitely.
so to speak, or the MPs in the
I think
House
they
of
should be able to back the leader and have a debate, but at the same time, I think there should be a more, again, a togetherness. Labour are a party that's very much supposed to be about togetherness, and I just feel that it's entirely gone against that.
Billy Brown.
I think both those comments have touched on Kezia's real problem. The silence that you heard after your first comment, Kezia, was actually the sound of scepticism. Because I think the people of Scotland are not stupid. They recognise that whatever Corbyn says and whatever he stands for, he doesn't have the support of the Parliamentary Labour Party. And they know that he could come up with some great ideas, but they won't be able to be carried through unless he has the support of the membership, but he doesn't have the support of the Parliamentary Labour Party. And until he does, until that's resolved, it's going to be a real problem. You can't expect the leader of a British mainstream political party to come to Scotland and talk about independence. I don't think that's possible. But Corbyn must have something to say about self-determination to the people of Scotland. I don't understand why he's not talking about federalism. The answer to the West Lothian question is not English votes for English laws. That's a total fudge. The answer to the West Lothian question has always been, if you have a Scottish Parliament, you have to have an English Parliament. And I really think if the Labour Party could come out in favour of federalism, not only would they have at least something to talk to people in Scotland who want greater self-determination, but they'd also be able to speak to a lot of people who feel disenfranchised in England, because a new assembly would surely be elected under proportional representation, which would be able to give representation to all those people who are disenfranchised, voting UKIP, voting Green at the last election. I don't know why they're not talking about it.
Okay. The man there with spectacles on.
Jeremy Corbyn is going to go down in history as the man that consolidated the two governing parties in Scotland and England into effective one-party states. Is that unpopular?
You're just going to end up with
SNP in Scotland and Conservatives in England.
Do you think that's going to happen?
It's already happened.
It's already happened. Do you want to comment on that?
I wouldn't write him off yet. I mean, there are 660... Hang on, though. Look at what he's faced. A media onslaught People raking through his bins, cameras in his face when he goes out to collect the papers. There are plenty vested interests in this country who don't want him to do well. And I look beyond the Parliamentary Labour Party and I see a growing political movement. 660,000 people signed up to be a member of the party or to support the Labour Party. That is a tremendous step forward. And I've said here tonight I didn't vote for him, but I tell you something, I'm 100% loyal to him because I believe in the Labour Party and I believe what it can do to transform the fortunes of this country.
Well, actually, interesting, like Kezia, I wouldn't write off Jeremy Corbyn. I really wouldn't. I mean, the Tories seem very secure in England at the moment, but in the UK at the moment. But it doesn't take much of a crisis to change people's minds, and there's a lot of potential crises out there. But going back to Scotland, I think the really interesting point here is that Scotland is not quite as left-wing as Scotland thinks it is. And I put great store by the social attitude surveys, which are done in Scotland and in Britain as a whole. And if you flick through those, and they go back a long way, they're very statistically significant. You can see that on almost every issue, the Scottish as a whole tend to think about things in almost exactly the same way as the English. So Scotland is not by its nature as left-wing as it likes to think it is. So there isn't
What do you
necessarily...
mean, as it likes to think it's...
Well, whenever you read Scottish newspapers or you talk to the Scots, or in fact if you ask the Scots if they believe that they are more left-wing than the English, they will say yes. But the actual real surveys, the social attitude surveys, don't tell you that at all. They tell you that generally the Scottish and the English think about things in a remarkably similar way. The only statistically significant different thing, by the way, is the EU, which the Scottish and the English do appear to think differently on. My point being that it's very hard for there to be two parties in Scotland that are perceived as left-wing, i.e. the SNP and Labour. They can't really coexist. You have, if you're going to have separate parties, they can't be these two. There has to be a third party.
Is the SNP seen as left-wing?
I think generally perceived as, yes.
Keith Brown?
And certainly you've taken the left from Labour very firmly, haven't you? No doubt about that.
Doesn't mean they're necessarily... Yeah,
oh, no, I would agree. It doesn't
Well,
mean they necessarily are, but they certainly present as, shall we say.
Well, we have this quite a lot, and we often get it from the Labour Party that you're not redistributive or not anti-austerity. If you think, for example, of, just to give one or two examples, concrete examples, what we've put through the Parliament is free school meals for P1 to P3s, which is very important, was opposed by the Labour Party in the Parliament. We've also redistributed in terms of the council tax benefit. We've also made sure that the bedroom tax did not hit people in Scotland, unlike in Wales, where, for example, Labour are in control. So there's quite a lot we do there which is redistributive. I would also argue we're a very pro-business party, especially small business, with a small business bonus scheme. You know, but the crucial point here is, I think, the point that Kezia made. If the Labour Party this weekend discusses Trident and comes out against spending £167 billion of your money on Trident, will Kezia then say to Ian Murray, the sole remaining Labour MP in Scotland, when you go down to London, you must vote against Trident? And that will be the test of whether or not we have an autonomous Labour Party.
Yes, at the very back row.
Generally speaking, most left-wing Scots identify as nationalists and therefore vote SNP, regardless of whether or not they're as left-wing as they say they are. I don't understand how Scottish Labour can move to the left and expect to pick up these nationalists who vote for the SNP out with of economic reasons, but because they are nationalists. And therefore, the only place you can pick up votes is from the centre and from the right, and Jeremy Corbyn's not going to win them. All Corbyn is doing is failing to re-win voters that have gone to the SNP and driving other voters to the Tories, who, by the way, were 1 percentage point behind Labour last time I checked in the polls. So.
Okay. Billy Bragg, do you want to come back on the point?
Yeah, I mean, nobody thought that sending a parliament to Scotland would lead towards a more independent Scotland. Everybody thought that that was going to kill the issue of independence. It didn't. Nobody thought that the 45% of the Scottish people would vote in favour of independence, but they did. So to sit up there and tell me what's going to happen to Jeremy Corbyn, mate, I think you've got another thing coming. The country is changing. The way that people want...
I look forward to the landslide, Billy.
What people want from politics is changing. That's easily visible here in Scotland. It's not quite yet so visible in England, but Corbyn is a representative of that urge for change. This is grassroots Labour. This is the reason why Red Ed, so-called, didn't win last time, because that was the old way of doing things, a hollowed-out party, top-down orders, and the membership disregarded. All this is changing, and the sort of excitement that I saw when I came up to Scotland during the independence campaign, I was fortunate to be in Scotland on the day that the Yes campaign were first put forward to win. I was up there on that day, so I got some of that excitement. We are starting to feel that in England because now Jeremy is the leader. We just have to convince, first, the Parliamentary Labour Party, and then everybody else, that he really does represent genuine positive change.
If you can't convince your own party, you can't convince the electorate.
As I said, we first have to need to convince our own party, and as they all watch this programme, I'm hoping that they're squirming in their seats at home and thinking about this.
OK. Just take a few more points, then we'll go on to another question. Yes.
Well, I'm a left-wing Scot and I'm not a nationalist. And at the end of May, when I was looking at the 4 Labour leadership candidates then, I looked down them all, Burnham, Cooper, Kendall, and I joined the Scottish Green Party. I've been an affiliate member of Unite, and I thought I can't bear to vote for any of these people. This is not the Labour Party I want to be even affiliated with. And then Corbyn got nominated, and well, but I don't know if Jeremy Corbyn can save the Scottish Labour Party because I don't know if his MPs will let him. But I do know that none of the other leadership candidates had a chance. And I like Jeremy Corbyn has popular, middle-of-the-road, left-wing opinions. People want, polling says what Jeremy Corbyn wants domestically, real nationalisation, save the NHS, is what people want.
OK. And you, sir?
I think it's plain that the Labour Party lost Scotland, firstly because when they had a huge majority in Westminster, they ignored Scotland and took the Scottish MPs for granted and thought they were always going to get 50 MPs up here. And secondly, they did the Tories' dirty work during the referendum campaign. Simple as that.
I think we should go on to another question. Anna Roper, please. Anna Roper.
Was it right to bail out the banks but not the steel industry?
Was it right to bail out the banks but not the steel industry? There are various measures being proposed to help the steel industry but not a bailout. Merryn, what do you think?
An unpopular answer it's going to be, but the answer is yes, we absolutely were. I think that it's generally one to try and avoid bailing out industries of any kind whatsoever. But there is a good case to be made for bailing out industries that are in short-term trouble, that are systemically important to an economy, and that will definitely return to profit. And that has been the case with the banks. Approve or not approve of our banking system and the way the financial industry works, it has nonetheless returned to profit. That isn't going to deliver us a loss, and it's a long-term sustainable business. Now, other businesses, other sectors are not necessarily long-term sustainable. And I'm afraid the awful truth is that in the UK, the steel industry falls into that group. It's been in trouble for a long time, it's in trouble now, and I can't see it being the case in 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, that we suddenly have a profitable steel industry that can last for the long term. So we shouldn't, I don't think, be looking to bail out that kind of industry. We shouldn't be looking to help industry. Of course, what we should be doing is looking to help the people that are suffering as a result of that industry, so that industry failing. So we can't really help the steel industry, but what we can do is help the steel workers afterwards.
Kezia Dugdale, do you agree with that?
No, I really don't agree with that. If you look at the 2 plants in Scotland, in DL and Clydebridge, they do rolled steel plate. And as I understand it, those particular plants are profitable. The reason that they're closing down is Tata Europe want to make savings across the whole of their kind of bases. Now, I think these plants in Scotland have a viable future. I think there's a positive future for steel production in this country, but we have to take some steps to realise that. We need to get some new assets into those plants so they can make more than one thing, which they currently do just now. We've got to protect these highly skilled engineers that work in the plants. And short-time working would do that, letting these jobs stay on for a few days a week until we can get a new company into the plant to operate that. And do you know what else? We should use Scottish steel and Scottish products that we make in this country, put it right into the heart of our infrastructure and everything that we're building. Now, I think there is a viable future for this industry, but we have to believe that there's a viable future, not just manage the decline. That's not acceptable.
OK. Keith Brown, what's the Scottish Government's view of this?
I think it is difficult, but I think it's not impossible. You had a situation a few months back when Ferguson's, the last shipbuilding concern on the Clyde, was about to go to the wall. And through an awful lot of effort in the Scottish Government and elsewhere, that has now been saved and is now prospering in terms of orders it's had for new ferries. You've also had a situation where Prestwick Airport was going to go to the wall, a loss of thousands of jobs in the west of Scotland, and we did essentially nationalise that in the meantime. Going back to the point, though, about the banks, why did we bail out the banks? We bailed out the banks because we were told they're a cornerstone of the system and you have to have the banking system. But the perception, I think, for most people was you were going in there to keep the banks there so they could continue to lend to people and to businesses. Instead, they didn't. They used all the money that they got from us to build up their capital sheets. Even now, they are not lending to small businesses. And if the stark contrast today with David Cameron being in Iceland, Iceland jailed the bankers. I mean, if you think about, and I can't believe there's been so little said about this, corrupting the LIBOR mechanism, almost the very cornerstone of the capital system, corrupting that, and they're now looking at trying to ease back on the regulations if they find somebody else does it in future. These were huge crimes. Nobody's going to jail for that. I think there's a court case ongoing, but nobody's going to jail for that. Iceland jailed the bankers when they found they were corrupt. We should have done the same thing. And we should have kept the bankers...
Are you going to bail out the steel plants then? That
well, I think, as I said, the Scottish Government has started working. There's a meeting today for the first time with the concerns. We want to keep that viable. Ferguson is doing a great deal of work on it. But just last one word on the banks.
You've said a lot on the banks. Annabel Goldie. No, you've said your bit on the banks. Annabel Goldie. Sorry, I've got to get round the table.
I think it's very important that politicians are realistic about what they can do in a difficult situation like this, and equally realistic about what they cannot do. And I'm very struck by what Keith Brown is saying, because it's a bit of a departure from what has been the clear line of the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government has said that if the 2 steel plants in Scotland can find a commercial buyer, it will do everything within its power to assist that. Now, I think that's sensible and a realistic way to go forward. I think what governments can also do is, as is happening with the UK Government, they're attempting to ensure that projects within this country will procure British steel, and I think that's a very good way to go forward. They're providing, as Merryn has said, help to people who are affected at the moment. But I think we've got to be very clear about how I think unviable it is for a government to buy a failing industry if it's failing because there's not a demand for product out there at a price that will keep the industry going. And that's the difficulty. Steel has got global oversupply and the price has plummeted. And that's bitter and it's harsh and it's difficult for the workers in the plants affected. But it does mean that when you talk, as Kezia did, about trying to take it over because it's basically profitable, well, it's not profitable if actually market prices won't give the company the return it needs to keep the thing going. And that is the dilemma. And I think politicians have to be utterly realistic about where they can help. They can help in many ways, but they also have to be realistic about what's not viable. I just don't think there's any question. You cannot take over an industry which has not apparently got a viable commercial future. It's not fair to you as taxpayers, it's not fair to public services, because you create a drain on the public purse by using money, sadly, for something that cannot give a return.
Point
and
made.
Keith,
Yeah, I
can
think
just
you've made the
come
point.
back
No,
to
let's keep moving. You there on the right, yes? And then I'll come to you in the pink pullover. Yes.
Is it possible for British industries such as the steel industry to compete with China, India, those economies?
Is it your view that it is possible or not possible?
No, I don't really think it is. I mean, their labour charges are much less than ours. I just wonder if there is a way that we can produce higher quality goods, you know, and encourage our industry to do that, rather than just shelving the plants.
Billy Bragg, you want to answer her point?
Well, Adam Smith, he says, going for a bit of local colour. Adam Smith said that there was an invisible hand. Capitalism worked with an invisible hand that would deal with those, like the laws of the jungle, would deal with those businesses that were not viable. This is what's being given to the steel workers now. The invisible hand of capitalism is strangling their hopes of the future, whereas the bankers at RBS, the invisible hand kind of just tickled them. You know, it came, they clearly were, should have, by the rules set down by Adam Smith, those banks should have failed. We couldn't let them fail. We couldn't let them fail because how important they are to our economy. But having rescued the banks, we're now letting them get back up again and do exactly the same thing as they did before. We need to be making sure that the banks we've nationalised, particularly the biggest one, RBS, we should have made that into a national bank and said that it's not going to speculate on the stock market, it's going to help small to medium businesses, it's going to help people who want mortgages, it's going to help the community. But the Tories have a total rejection of any kind of nationalisation. They see that the free market should go into places like Redcar, Motherwell.
You say you'd nationalise the steel industry, would you?
Well, I would say that it shouldn't be socialism for the bankers and capitalism for the steel workers.
I'm asking whether you'd nationalise the steel industry.
I would.
I'm going to go back. Does he convince you?
Working in the financial services industry myself, and quite recently for RBS, I think it's not quite as clear cut as that.
It never is.
Yeah,
for
exactly.
bankers.
Well, I'm not a banker.
No, I'm just
I
saying
work for a
generally.
bank.
I'm just saying it's very sort of like for bankers. It's always a little bit blurred that they never quite did it themselves. And they never quite get.
Let her have her say. I think you know there is the casino banking side of things, and there's the retail side of things, and I think there's been legislation that's trying to separate those two out.
Would that be viable?
Yeah, I think it is.
What about his answer on the steel industry? Because you made the point that the steel industry couldn't sell because of Chinese
I think it's
and Indian steel.
It's very difficult for them because you are competing on a global market. And how can we expect workers in this country with the kind of quality of life that we have here and lifestyles that we have, how can we expect them to work for as little as people are prepared to do in developing countries? That's not to say that that's acceptable that people in developing countries, but their cost of living is much lower than ours.
Okay.
And so
the man in the pink pullover there
I think it's absolutely appalling that the bankers were bailed out and they're now getting back to their massive bonuses again, and the rest of us at the bottom of the heap are struggling like crazy. Why don't they take some of the tax credits and billions of pounds of the benefits that are given and refinance and restart the major British industries and give people a pride-giving, meaningful employment like they had before? It could then be sold on. We know jolly well the Germans still have a perfectly good steel industry, and so do other European countries. Why can't we? The cost of power in this country is massive, which is one of the main problems.
And the government is taking steps to deal with that. That's a very important point. You're quite correct that industries like steel have been suffering hugely from energy charges, and the government has intervened to address that and assist the companies. Well, it has intervened to help them to assist the companies, but the bottom line remains, if global prices and pressures mean that you haven't got a market for what you're doing at a price which will sustain it, you have a problem.
Okay, yes.
I just was wanting to pick up on particularly what you said about the banking being a sustainable form of business. I suppose, this question I don't want to just direct at you or maybe the whole panel, but industries in the UK seem to be disappearing more and more. What industries can we go for? So we've got banking, what else?
Well, we're good at an awful lot of things. I mean, one of the extraordinary things about this discussion, there's a lot of grandstanding around manufacturing jobs. Steel is something that politicians can grandstand about amazingly, and everyone's at it. Steel is something special. But why aren't accountants special? Why aren't journalists special? No one's stepping in to try and say, for example, my industry, journalists are losing their jobs all over the place. Newspapers shut down every day. Two local newspapers shut down in Scotland only this week. And I don't see any of this lot stepping in to try and save us, to nationalise our businesses, to nationalise, the newspaper business. That's not happening. But hold on, Billy. Manufacturing is considered to be something that everyone can grandstand about because somehow manufacturing jobs are superior to other jobs. Well, you know what? They're not. A steelworking job is not superior to an accountancy job, to a financial services job, to a journalism job, to working for a technology company, to printing fantastic textiles in Birmingham. It just isn't, and we shouldn't behave as though it is.
Kezia?
This is more than a job. This is more than a job. This is an iconic Scottish industry. This is going to affect the whole
That is
community.
grandstanding.
No,
There will
it's
be
not.
new iconic
No, it's not,
Scottish
because
industries. You can't protect the past at the expense of the future.
There is a
Somebody has
practical
to
thing
pay. Every time you take an industry and say it's iconic, so we have to protect it, somebody has to pay. And that's this
Hang
lot.
on.
That's
I respectfully
taxpayers.
listen to your point of view, so let me finish mine. The reason that the cost is so low just now is because the Chinese are dumping their steel in our
They are not
markets.
dumping,
It may
they have
not always
oversupply.
be that way. We can build a viable future for this industry if we use a bit of government money, for example, to help them diversify the types of products that they make.
What do you mean by an iconic? What do you mean by the word iconic?
It is the skyline of central Scotland to see these steelworks and the things that they make and the pride that people have in the jobs that they do. When the steel industry goes, a whole generation of Scottish history goes with it. I am not prepared to see the light go out without a fight. I believe there's a viable future for this industry, and I think governments here and in London should step up and make that future.
Kezia, I applaud your passion, and nobody doubts it for one moment or your sincerity about the issue, but under Labour, 16,000 steel jobs were lost in the last government. So why was this policy and this approach not adopted then?
OK, you said in purple.
The original question was about fairness and justice, about how we've treated banks and how we're currently treating the steel industry. Until we deal with the legacy of the banking crisis and hold those to account properly, and including possibly sequestering the assets that are owned by key individuals who are responsible for that, we could be using that money to finance a whole number of different things in the country.
Okay. I want to go to somebody in the fourth row has had a hand up for a long, long time. And then I think we'll move to another question. Yes.
If we let the steel industry fall by the wayside, then what are we going to do to plug the gap? It sounds a lot like the conversation we had in the 1980s under Thatcher, when the coal industry declined and thousands of jobs were lost. Yet still today, there are whole communities across the whole of Scotland, northeast of England, Wales, who are still depressed, without jobs, nothing. So if you are going to let the steel industry fail, then you've got to replace it with something.
Okay.
That's my point. Can a country like Britain afford to lose its manufacturing base? Because that's what you're talking about. You're talking about the manufacturing base of our country. Can we, as a modern economy, afford to have no manufacturing base?
Right.
Just get by a service industry and...
Well, first I would say that, you know, a job is a job is a job. An export is an export and export. It doesn't matter if it's manufacturing or not. Obviously, it's good to have a diversified economy. And we still have a manufacturing base. We just have a good, high-quality manufacturing base. If you go look around the Midlands, you look at a lot of the north of England, there is solid manufacturing happening there, and it is growing.
OK, I'll take one more point from the man in the blue shirt there.
Why is the new fourth crossing not being made with Scottish steel? If it was a French bridge, there wouldn't be a drop of anything other than
Is this for him? Just briefly, we had a number of questions. Why isn't the new bridge?
First of all, there is Scottish steel that's produced in Scotland being used in the bridge, but the main part of the steel part of the contract, there was no bid from anywhere in Scotland. It's not made in Scotland. That kind of steel is not made in Scotland anymore, and that's why it's not on that bridge. But just to say, the last point I want to make is about the banks. When they sold off the shares for Lloyds, we took a £1 billion hit. They sold them off for less than they were worth. Imagine what we could have done for the steel and many other industries if we'd got the proper rate for that money for the Lloyds investment. £1 billion could have gone towards that. And that shows the way that they treat manufacturing differently. And it's not the case. It's not necessarily because it's iconic. It's about a 50-year-old male, for example, that knows is now a steel worker, that if the steel works goes, he will not have a chance of getting another job. It's about saving those jobs and that livelihood. Nothing to do necessarily with the iconic nature of the industry. It's a historic industry. It's about safeguarding people's jobs. And it's easier for people in other sectors to go on often to get another job. It's very difficult in those communities, and that's why we have to save them.
Thank you very much. All right. We've got time for a question from you, Jackie Clayton, please. Jackie.
Should there be an inquiry into the delay of the Chilcot inquiry? And if so, how long would this take?
We hear we're going to get it by June or July. Billy Bragg, should there be an inquiry into the delay?
Well, I really think there should be. You know, the idea, I think this Maxwellisation, it's called, of asking people to respond to what's there. I don't see why it's taken such a long time. It's relatively straightforward. Your considerations, I think, should have been given to the sensibilities of families of servicemen and women who served there, some who never came back. The fact that it's taken so long has left so much speculation, I think, has only really been bad for the idea that ultimately, when we do find out what Chilcot thinks, those who made mistakes, those who are responsible, will be held to account. Now, you know, you've already seen Tony Blair trying to get his two pence in before it all comes back. I'm sure that the Americans also, who do have a big part to play, as they provided the original intelligence that led to the dodgy dossier, they're probably putting their oar in as well. Whether they're trying to hold it back, I don't know. But the British public really do deserve to know the truth about what happened, why we were involved in Iraq. It's still an issue that really divides people very heavily, and I think the sooner it comes out and the sooner we can talk about it, the better it will be, not just for us, but more importantly, the families of those people who lost loved ones there.
Kezia Dugdale. Has it been unduly delayed? And people have said that Tony Blair was one of the people who might have, he's denied it, tried to hold it up.
It certainly feels unduly delayed. I mean, it must be published at the earliest possible opportunity, and that should have been yesterday. I read today that it does account to, I think, 2 million words, so this is going to be huge. It's going to take people a long time to get their heads around it and read it and see the detail. But that is absolutely right. People need to know what's happened. This is, you know, our experience of Iraq. It's clouded our approach and our attitudes to UK foreign affairs for a decade now. I don't think as a country we can ever move on until we have the answers from this report, so it needs to be published now.
Keith Brown.
Yeah, I think there's 2 points. First of all, Billy says the British public have got to know, and that is true. But more important than that are the families of the service personnel that were there. Can you imagine if you were a soldier going to Iraq and you were told you were going there because of weapons of mass destruction? Can you imagine having seen your mates being killed on the way and then finding out there were no weapons of mass destruction? That would be horrific, I think, for any serving person. And it's obviously horrific for their families, some of whom we've seen today, trying to find out some of these answers. So, yes, it's taken longer than the Second World War lasted so far. But the second point...
Are you critical of the delay, or do you think it's just because he's been doing his job?
I think the delay is appalling. I mean, Chilcot said it was be ready in 2011. We're now, 4 years on, a half promise it might come out next year. But what's more worrying, I think, is today we're told it's going to get vetted for national security sensitivities. And I've got a real concern about that. The Blair memos, the Blair Bush access with Colin Powell in between, what was actually said, is that stuff going to be lifted out of this process? So, at the very least... At the very least, there has to be a democratic oversight of anything that's taken out, whether it's through the Security Committee at Westminster. There's got to be somebody looking to make sure they're not just covering somebody's embarrassment. People died in this process, and they deserve to get the answers.
Annabel Goldie, are you worried by the announcement that they're going to have a security check on what's been said by Chilcot? We have to be quick, because they're coming towards the end here.
I think I totally understand the frustration and the anger about the delay. I know it's been complex. I know it's been a huge form of inquiry, but nonetheless, and the Prime Minister vented that frustration. He said to Sir John Chilcot, we need to get this done and dusted. And Keith is absolutely right. There are interests here. There are the interests of families of servicemen and women who are over there, the interests of the public to know what happened and why decisions were made. And as to the security issues, we've still to bear in mind we have servicemen and women engaged in conflicts elsewhere. We've got a difficult situation at the moment that we're policing in relation to Syria. And yes, I think there may be intelligence security issues. It's right that regard is had to that, David, but what the public now is wanting and making a clamant demand for is we need this inquiry produced now. Please get it public as quickly as possible.
All right. And Merryn, the fact that it's going to... We, of course, won't know what's taken out for security reasons, but are you concerned by that by the long delay?
I'm very concerned about the whole thing. I mean, Annabel makes excellent points on why it might have taken so long, but I'm amazed it wasn't time-limited in the first place. You know, you have a certain amount of time to do this. But the main thing that I think politicians should be considering here is that, you know, trust has gone from politics in the UK. Trust has gone across the board, not just in the UK, but across much of the world. And this is exactly the kind of reason why. You ask a simple question, well, it's not that simple, but it's reasonably simple, and you think you can get an answer in something less than 2 million words, and you can't, and you don't.
And there's one other issue that might just one time...
I've got to stop. I'm sorry, but...
It's OK.
It's our time's up, and apologies to you for your hand up. Our time's up.
I've been getting away with it